The white gown was a trap, and Clara Whitmore walked right into it. She didn't know that wearing white to Lord Adrian Blackthorne's winter ball meant accepting a marriage proposal. She was just a paid companion trying to survive another evening in borrowed silk. But the moment she stepped through those ballroom doors, whispers erupted like wildfire. Every eye turned, and when the coldest, most feared lord in England locked his gaze on her, Clara's invisible life shattered into 1,000 pieces. One mistake. One dress. One night that would change everything. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The dress didn't fit. Clara had known that the moment Mrs. Hartley thrust it into her arms 3 hours before the ball, her employer's face pinched with that familiar look of calculated dismissal. "You'll wear this tonight," Mrs. Hartley had said, not asked. "My daughter's cast off. It's perfectly adequate for someone in your position." Someone in your position. The words had landed like they always did, a reminder that Clara Whitmore, daughter of a country gentleman who'd gambled away his estate and drunk himself to death, was now nothing more than a shadow in other people's houses, a paid companion. Decorative furniture with a pulse. The gown was white. Pristine, shimmering white silk with seed pearls sewn along the bodice. Too fine for a woman who earned £3 a month fetching shawls and reading tedious poetry aloud. But Clara had learned long ago not to question. She'd worn it, cinched the waist as tight as she could manage, and followed Mrs. Hartley and her preening daughter Lydia into the carriage bound for Blackthorne Manor. Now, standing at the top of the marble staircase that swept down into the most magnificent ballroom she'd ever seen, Clara wished she'd burned the damn dress instead. The moment she appeared, the music didn't stop. Not exactly. But something shifted. A ripple of awareness moved through the crowd like wind across wheat. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. A woman near the punch table gasped, her gloved hand flying to her mouth. Clara's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" she whispered to Lydia, but the girl had already drifted away, her pink gown swishing as she joined a cluster of debutantes who were staring at Clara with expressions somewhere between horror and glee. Mrs. Hartley had vanished entirely. The whispers started soft, then grew louder. Clara caught fragments as she descended the stairs, each step feeling like walking toward an execution. Wearing white, does she know? Blackthorne family tradition. Acceptance of the proposal. Bold little thing, isn't she? Proposal? What proposal? Clara's fingers tightened on the banister, her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run back up those stairs and disappear into the night. But running would only make it worse. Whatever this was, she'd have to face it. The ballroom was a winter fantasy. Evergreen garlands draped from the chandeliers, their crystal drops catching candlelight and scattering it like stars. White roses, thousands of them, spilled from silver urns. The floor gleamed like black ice. And everywhere, people were staring at her. Clara forced herself to breathe, forced her spine straight. She'd survived worse than public scrutiny. She'd survived her father's rages, her mother's slow death from shame, the auction of her childhood home where neighbors picked over her family's belongings like carrion birds. She could survive this. Then the crowd parted, and she saw him. Lord Adrian Blackthorne stood near the far windows, a glass of something amber in his hand, his tall frame silhouetted against the frost-covered glass. Even from across the room, he was unmistakable. Everyone knew what he looked like. The hard angles of his face, the dark hair swept back from a widow's peak, the eyes that were supposedly gray but looked black in certain lights. Like now, he was looking directly at her. The whispers crescendoed into a roar. Clara felt the weight of 100 stares, but his was the only one that mattered. His gaze moved over her slowly, taking in the white dress, her dark hair pinned up with Mrs. Hartley's cast-off combs, her face, which she knew was too pale, her hands which were trembling despite her best efforts. His expression didn't change, not a flicker of surprise, anger, or anything else. He simply looked at her like she was a problem he was calculating how to solve. Then he set down his glass and started walking toward her. The crowd melted away from his path. Of course they did. This was Adrian Blackthorne, heir to one of the oldest titles in England, master of 3 estates, and by all accounts completely untouchable. Not in the sense of his wealth or position, though he had both in abundance. Untouchable because he was cold, controlled. A man who'd buried his young wife 5 years ago and hadn't so much as glanced at another woman since. Until tonight. Miss Whitmore. His voice was low, precise. He stopped exactly 3 feet from her, close enough to be intentional, far enough to be proper. Up close, he was even more unsettling than the rumors suggested, not because he was cruel-looking, because he was blank. A locked door with no keyhole. Lord Blackthorne. Clara dipped into a curtsy, her mind racing. How did he know her name? She'd never met him, never even been in the same room as him before tonight. An interesting choice of attire. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an accusation. Just a statement, flat and cold as the December night outside. Clara started, but her throat closed. What could she possibly say? I didn't know. I'm just a companion. I wore what I was told. The truth sounded like an excuse, and excuses sounded like guilt. Around them, the whispers had evolved into outright stares. A matron in purple silk clutched her husband's arm. A young man laughed behind his hand. 2 debutantes huddled together, their faces alight with schadenfreude. Walk with me, Blackthorne said. Not an invitation, an order. He offered his arm. Clara stared at it like it might bite her. Every fiber of her being wanted to refuse, to demand an explanation, to do something other than meekly follow this stranger's command. But she'd learned the hard way that women in her position didn't have the luxury of pride. And besides, the whispers would be 10 times worse if she refused him now. She placed her hand on his sleeve. The fabric was fine wool, perfectly tailored. Beneath it, his arm was solid, unmovable. He led her through the crowd at a measured pace, not hurrying, not slowing. People parted. People stared. An elderly man with magnificent whiskers gave Blackthorne a sharp nod. A woman in diamonds looked Clara up and down with naked calculation. They passed through a set of doors onto a terrace. The cold hit like a slap. Clara's breath plumed in the air. She had no wrap, no shawl. Within seconds, she was shivering. Blackthorne released her arm and moved to the stone balustrade, gazing out over the dark gardens below. Do you know what you've done? No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. I don't. And I'd very much appreciate it if someone would explain instead of speaking in riddles and staring at me like I've committed murder. He turned his head slightly. In the moonlight, his profile could have been carved from marble. In my family, there is a tradition. When the heir extends a private invitation to a winter ball and a woman arrives wearing white, it signifies her acceptance of a marriage proposal. The world tilted. I didn't. Clara grabbed the balustrade for support. I wasn't invited. I came with my employer. I didn't know. Mrs. Hartley. Yes. Who is on the board of 3 charities I fund and has been angling for a closer connection to my family for the better part of a year. Oh. Oh no. Clara's mind spun back. Mrs. Hartley's insistence that she wear this particular dress, the way she'd vanished the moment they arrived, Lydia's smug little smile. This wasn't an accident. It was a setup. She told me it was a cast-off, Clara said numbly. She said her daughter didn't want it anymore. Lydia wore that dress to a garden party last summer. It was never white. Blackthorne's voice remained perfectly level as if they were discussing the weather. Someone had it altered, dyed, prepared. The cold wasn't just from the winter air anymore. It sank into Clara's bones, ice-sharp and vicious. Mrs. Hartley had done this deliberately, had dressed Clara like a sacrificial lamb and pushed her straight into the blade. But why? I don't understand, she said. What does she gain from this? A scandal. Blackthorne finally looked at her fully. His eyes were gray. She could see that now. Pale gray, like winter sky. The upstart companion who trapped the untouchable Lord Blackthorne into an engagement. My family pressures me to honor the tradition. I refuse. You're ruined. Mrs. Hartley emerges as the sympathetic patron who tried to help a fallen gentlewoman, only to be betrayed by her presumption and ambition. Clara's hands clenched on the cold stone. And if you do honor it, then she has a connection to my family through you, a foothold she can exploit. That's insane. That's society. He said it without bitterness, just fact. And Clara realized with a sinking certainty that he was right. This was how their world worked. Carefully constructed traps disguised as opportunities, alliances built on calculated cruelties, people used and discarded like game pieces. She'd been a fool to think she could navigate it just by keeping her head down and doing what she was told. So what happens now? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Do I leave? Make a scene? Throw myself on your mercy and beg you to save my reputation? Your reputation is already gone. The words were brutal in their simplicity. True, too. Clara knew it. The moment she'd walked into that ballroom, her fate had been sealed. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London would be buzzing with the story of Clara Whitmore's outrageous presumption. No family would hire her. No respectable house would take her in. She'd be lucky to find work as a scullery maid. Unless. There's another option, Blackthorne said quietly. Clara looked at him, really looked. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes now, not warmth exactly, more like acknowledgement. He saw her. Not as furniture or a problem, but as a person caught in the same trap he was. What option? We give them what they expect. He turned to face her fully. For 3 days, we pretend this engagement is real. You stay at Blackthorne Manor as my guest. We're seen together. We play the part convincingly enough that when it ends, it appears to be a mutual decision rather than a scandal. And then? Then you receive a generous settlement, enough to live independently, perhaps start a school or shop. Whatever you wish. And I return to my life without the stain of having humiliated a gentlewoman. Clara's mind raced. 3 days. 3 days of pretending to be engaged to the coldest, most intimidating man she'd ever met. 3 days under the microscope of high society, where one wrong word or gesture could destroy them both. But the alternative was destitution. Real, grinding poverty. The kind her mother had died trying to escape. Why would you do this? She asked. You could just deny everything. Say I misunderstood, that it was a mistake. Your word against mine, you'd win. I could. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to name. But I don't make war on the defenseless. You were used, Miss Whitmore. I won't compound that injury. It should have sounded noble. Instead, it sounded tired. 3 days? Claire repeated. 3 days. She thought of Mrs. Hartley's face, the casual cruelty in how she'd handed over the dress. Thought of Lydia's smirk. Thought of every other employer who'd looked through her like she was glass. Every family that had made her eat in the kitchen with the servants. Every reminder that she was barely a step above nothing. And she thought, just for a moment, about what it would feel like to walk back into that ballroom on Adrian Blackthorne's arm, to see their faces, to stop being invisible. All right, she said. 3 days. His expression didn't change, but he offered his hand. Not his arm this time. His hand, palm up. An agreement between equals. Clara placed her hand in his. His fingers were cold, his grip firm. Then let's give them a show, Blackthorne said. They returned to the ballroom together. The whispers exploded into full conversation the moment they appeared. Blackthorne kept Clara's hand tucked into the crook of his arm, his pace deliberately slow. He was putting her on display, Clara realized, making sure everyone saw them together, saw his acceptance of her presence, claiming her. The thought made her skin prickle, but she kept her chin up and her expression neutral. She'd learned how to do this, how to be seen but not really present, how to float through social situations like a ghost. Except now, every eye in the room was on her, really on her. Smile, Blackthorne murmured. You look like you're walking to the gallows. Aren't I? We both are. Might as well enjoy the procession. Despite everything, Clara felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. She swallowed it down, but not before her mouth quirked. Blackthorne saw it. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or something else. They were intercepted almost immediately. Adrian. The woman who materialized in front of them was stunning. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, wearing a gown of deep emerald that probably cost more than Clara would earn in 5 years. Introducing us to your guest? Her pause before guest was deliberate, surgical. Lady Hartwick, Blackthorne said smoothly. May I present Miss Clara Whitmore? Clara, this is Lady Catherine Hartwick, an old family friend. Friend. The word was weighted with something Clara couldn't quite parse. Lady Hartwick's smile was all teeth. Miss Whitmore, how Unexpected. Her gaze raked over Clara's dress, lingering on every detail. I don't believe we've met. Where are you from? It was the first question everyone asked. Where are you from really meant, who are your people? What's your bloodline? Do you matter? Sussex, Clara said evenly. My father was Jonathan Whitmore of Meadowbrook. She watched recognition flicker across Lady Hartwick's face. Oh yes, everyone knew about Jonathan Whitmore, the country gentleman who'd lost everything and left his daughter with nothing but debts and shame. I see. Lady Hartwick's smile sharpened. And you're currently employed as a companion, Claire said before Blackthorne could intervene, to Mrs. Hartley. How industrious of you. The words dripped condescension, though I suppose circumstances force us all to certain choices. Indeed, Clara agreed, though some of us have fewer choices than others. It was a small rebellion, barely even a jab, but Lady Hartwick's eyes narrowed fractionally. Adrian, darling, we must speak about the charity auction next week. I know you're dreadfully busy with all of this. Another pointed glance at Clara. But the Children's Hospital is counting on your donation. Of course, Blackthorne said. Send word to my secretary. He'll arrange everything. I'd prefer to discuss it with you personally. My secretary will suffice. The dismissal was absolute. Lady Hartwick's smile went brittle, but she nodded gracefully and drifted away, her emerald skirts swishing. Old friend? Clara murmured once she was out of earshot. Former betrothed. Clara's head snapped toward him. What? Before I married Eleanor. Our families had an understanding. It dissolved when I chose elsewhere. She doesn't seem particularly dissolved. No, Blackthorne agreed. She doesn't. They continued their circuit of the room. More introductions. More thinly veiled insults disguised as curiosity. Clara fielded them all with a calm she didn't feel, while Blackthorne remained a solid, unyielding presence at her side. He didn't defend her, didn't need to. His presence was defense enough. But it was exhausting. Every smile felt like lifting a weight. Every polite response scraped against her pride. These people looked at her like she was dirt they'd tracked in on their shoes, and she had to stand there and pretend it didn't cut. You're doing well, Blackthorne said quietly during a brief lull. I'm surviving. Same thing, in this context. Clara glanced up at him. His expression was still unreadable, but there was something in his voice. Not quite warmth, but acknowledgement. Understanding. How long do we have to stay? She asked. Another hour at minimum. Less would be noticed. And then? Then you'll come to Blackthorne Manor. Your belongings will be sent for. You'll stay in the East Wing. It's been prepared for guests. When did you arrange that? I didn't. My housekeeper keeps rooms ready, part of her excessive efficiency. Lucky for us. Lucky, he repeated, and something bitter edged the word. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Around them, couples began flowing onto the dance floor. Blackthorne stiffened almost imperceptibly. We should dance, Clara said. No. The refusal was immediate, absolute. Clara looked at him more carefully. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. Whatever this was about, it went deeper than mere reluctance. People will talk if we don't, she pointed out. People are already talking. Then let's give them something specific to talk about. Clara turned to face him fully. One dance? You can survive one dance. You don't understand. Then help me understand. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, so quietly, she almost didn't hear it. I haven't danced since Eleanor died. Oh. Clara felt something twist in her chest. Not pity. She sensed he'd hate that. But recognition. She understood grief. Understood how certain things became impossible. How the simplest acts could carry unbearable weight. Then maybe it's time, she said gently. You don't get to decide that. You're right. I don't. Clara held his gaze. But we're pretending, remember? For 3 days we're playing parts. And part of your part is dancing with your supposed fiancé. So unless you want people wondering why you won't touch me. He took her hand. The movement was abrupt, almost rough. Before Clara could react, he was leading her onto the floor, his grip firm enough to border on painful. They fell into position, his hand at her waist, hers on his shoulder, their joined hands raised. The music swelled. They moved. Blackthorne danced like he did everything else, precisely, controlled, revealing nothing. His steps were perfect, his timing flawless. But Clara could feel the tension in him, coiled tight as a spring. This was costing him something. She didn't know what, but she felt it. "Breathe," she murmured. His eyes snapped to hers. "What?" "You're not breathing. Breathe." He didn't. For another few measures, he held himself rigid, mechanical. Then slowly she felt something shift. His shoulders loosened fractionally. His grip on her waist eased. He took a breath. "There," Clara said. "Better?" "No." But his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Not quite, but close enough that Clara felt a small, surprising warmth bloom in her chest. They danced in silence after that. Around them, other couples swirled, silks and satins, jewels catching candlelight, the constant hum of conversation and music. But in their small orbit, it was just the two of them, moving together, surviving together. When the music ended, Blackthorne released her immediately and stepped back. The wall was up again, solid as ever. "Enough," he said. "We're leaving." "Now?" "Now." He didn't wait for agreement, just offered his arm and began cutting through the crowd toward the exit. Clara followed, half running to keep pace. Behind them, she heard fresh whispers erupting. Speculation, scandal. Let them talk. They collected her cloak from a servant, a thin, worn thing that had been her mother's. Blackthorne frowned at it, but said nothing. His carriage was already waiting, black and gleaming, drawn by matched grays. He handed her in, then followed, settling onto the opposite bench. The door clicked shut. The carriage lurched into motion. In the sudden quiet, Clara became acutely aware of how small the space was, how close he was, how thoroughly her life had just been upended. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow, the announcement will be in the papers. We'll spend the day at the manor, being seen by the staff. I'll introduce you to my niece." "You have a niece?" "Eleanor's younger sister's child. She lives with me." His voice was carefully neutral. "Her parents died 2 years ago. Influenza." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You didn't kill them." The bluntness should have been shocking. Instead, Clara found it almost refreshing. No false sympathy. No performative grief. Just fact. "How old is she?" 7. "Her name is Margaret. She's—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Difficult." "Difficult how?" "She doesn't speak." Blackthorne looked out the window at the passing darkness. "Hasn't said a word since her mother died. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. She simply chooses silence." Clara thought about that. About a 7-year-old girl who'd lost everything and locked herself away in quiet. Maybe silence feels safer. Perhaps. The carriage rolled on. Outside, London's streets gave way to countryside. Inside, the silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted, full of things neither of them knew how to say. "Why are you really doing this?" Clara asked finally. "And don't say it's because you don't make war on the defenseless. There's more to it." Blackthorne was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because 5 years ago, I made choices that destroyed someone I loved, and I've spent every day since trying to control everything around me so I'd never make that kind of mistake again." He finally looked at her. "This situation, what Mrs. Hartley did to you, it's the kind of calculated cruelty I despise. So yes, I'm helping you. But don't mistake it for altruism. I'm also helping myself." "How?" "By proving I'm still capable of doing one decent thing." The honesty was startling, raw. Clara didn't know what to do with it, so she simply nodded. They didn't speak again for the rest of the journey. Chapo. Blackthorne Manor rose from the darkness like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of pale stone, dozens of windows reflecting moonlight, formal gardens sprawling in every direction. It was beautiful in a cold, austere way, built to impress rather than welcome. The carriage halted. A footman appeared to hand Clara down. She stepped onto gravel that crunched beneath her thin slippers, clutching her inadequate cloak against the December wind. Blackthorne emerged behind her. "Mrs. Winters," he called. A woman materialized in the doorway, middle-aged, iron-haired, wearing black bombazine and an expression of professional calm. The housekeeper. My lord. This is Miss Whitmore. She'll be staying in the East Wing. See that she has everything she needs. Of course. Mrs. Winters's gaze swept over Clara, missing nothing. Welcome, miss. Thank you, Clara managed. Blackthorne was already moving toward the house. I'll see you at breakfast, 8 o'clock. He disappeared inside, leaving Clara alone with the housekeeper. Mrs. Winters smiled, a small, genuine thing that softened her severe features. Come along, miss. You look frozen through. The interior of the manor was just as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, portraits of stern-faced ancestors staring down from the walls. But it was warm, at least, and smelled faintly of beeswax and lavender. Mrs. Winters led her up a sweeping staircase, down a long corridor, and finally to a door carved with ivy patterns. The Primrose Room, she announced, pushing it open. The room was lovely. Pale yellow wallpaper, white furniture, a four-poster bed with cream-colored linens, utterly unlike anywhere Clara had slept in years. Your things will arrive tomorrow, Mrs. Winters said. For tonight, there's a nightgown in the wardrobe and toiletries on the vanity. Is there anything else you need? No, thank you. Breakfast is at 8 in the morning room. A maid will show you the way. Mrs. Winters hesitated at the door. Miss Whitmore? A word of advice, if I may? Please. His lordship he's not an easy man, but he's a good one. Whatever you may hear, whatever rumors reach you, remember that. It was a strange thing to say. Clara wanted to ask what she meant, what rumors, but Mrs. Winters was already gone, pulling the door shut with a soft click. Alone, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed. The events of the evening crashed over her all at once. The white dress, the whispers, Blackthorne's cold proposal, the dance, the carriage ride. And now this, a beautiful room in a stranger's house, about to spend 3 days pretending to be engaged to a man she didn't know. She should be terrified, should be planning her escape. Instead, she felt something else, something dangerous and defiant and almost like hope. Tomorrow, she'd face society as Adrian Blackthorne's chosen bride. Tomorrow, she'd step into a role she'd never imagined playing. Tomorrow, she'd have to be someone else entirely. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Whitmore let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what the world had decided she was. Even if it was only for 3 days. Even if it was only pretend. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting sense that she'd forgotten something crucial. Then memory crashed back. The ball, the dress, Blackthorne's cold proposal, the 3-day bargain that had seemed almost reasonable in the dark confines of a carriage, but now, in the harsh light of morning, felt utterly insane. She sat up, her borrowed nightgown tangling around her legs. The clock on the mantel read 7:30. 30 minutes until breakfast. 30 minutes to make herself presentable enough to face Adrian Blackthorne across a table and pretend this was normal. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Winters. Instead, a young maid entered, arms loaded with fabric. "Begging your pardon, miss, but Mrs. Winters sent these. Said your things haven't arrived yet and you'd need something proper to wear." The girl laid out 3 dresses on the bed, simple but well made in shades of blue and gray. Not borrowed finery this time. Real clothes meant for wearing, not for traps. "Thank you," Clara said. "What's your name?" "Betsy, miss." The girl bobbed a curtsy. "I'm to help you dress if you'll have me." Clara almost laughed. When had she last had help dressing? Years ago, back when there'd been money and servants and a life that felt real. But Betsy was already reaching for the blue dress, her movements efficient and practiced, and Clara didn't have the energy to refuse. 20 minutes later, she was laced into the blue wool, her hair pinned into something resembling respectability, following Betsy down corridors that all looked the same. The manor was even larger than she'd realized. Room after room, hallway after hallway, enough space to lose yourself in. "The family's not what it was," Betsy said as they walked, apparently deciding that silence was more awkward than conversation. "Before the mistress died, there were parties every month, music, dancing. Now it's just his lordship and little Miss Margaret, and the house feels—" She trailed off, seeming to realize she was speaking too freely. "Empty?" Clara supplied. "Yes, miss, exactly that." They reached a door carved with pastoral scenes. Betsy opened it, revealing a bright room with windows overlooking the gardens. A table was set for two, and at the head of it sat Adrian Blackthorne, reading a newspaper with the same intense focus most people reserved for battle plans. He looked up as Clara entered. "Miss Whitmore, punctual. You said 8 o'clock. Most people interpret that as 8:15 at the earliest." He folded the paper and set it aside. "Please, sit." Clara took the chair opposite him, acutely aware of Betsy retreating and closing the door, leaving them alone. A footman appeared with tea and disappeared just as quickly, and then it was just the two of them in this sun-bright room, pretending to be something they weren't. "The announcement ran in 3 papers this morning," Blackthorne said, pouring tea with mechanical precision. "By noon, it will be the talk of every drawing room in London. By evening, we'll start receiving callers. You should prepare yourself." "For what?" "Scrutiny, questions, thinly veiled hostility from women who've been angling for this position for years." He slid a cup across to her. "It won't be pleasant." "Nothing about this is pleasant." "No," he agreed, "but it's necessary." Clara added sugar to her tea, watching him over the rim of her cup. In daylight, Blackthorne looked different, still austere, still controlled, but there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. And there was something else, something she hadn't noticed last night, a thin scar running along his left jaw, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. "What happened to your face?" she asked before she could stop herself. His hand moved to his jaw, then dropped. "Riding accident. Years ago." "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." The answer felt like a lie, but Clara didn't push. Instead, she took a sip of tea and nearly choked. It was terrible, oversteeped and bitter. Blackthorne noticed her expression, and something almost like amusement flickered across his face. "I prefer it strong." "This isn't strong. This is punishment." "Then make it yourself next time." "I will." They stared at each other across the table, and Clara realized with a start that they were almost arguing. Not the polite, careful exchanges of last night, but something sharper, more real. The door burst open. A small figure stood in the doorway. Dark curls, wild, dress already rumpled despite the early hour, eyes huge and solemn in a pale face. Margaret. Blackthorne's entire demeanor shifted. The wall came down, replaced by something gentler, uncertain. "Good morning, Maggie." The girl didn't respond, just looked at him, then at Clara, her expression unreadable. "This is Miss Whitmore," Blackthorne said carefully. "She's going to be staying with us for a few days. Clara, this is my niece, Margaret." Clara smiled. "Hello, Margaret." Silence. The girl studied Clara with an intensity that was almost unnerving, taking in every detail: the borrowed dress, the hastily pinned hair, the teacup in her hands. Then, without warning, she crossed to the table, climbed onto the chair next to Blackthorne, and reached for a piece of toast. "Would you like jam?" Clara asked. Margaret's eyes flicked to her. Still no words, but after a moment she nodded. "Progress." Clara passed the jam pot. Margaret took it, spread a careful layer on her toast, and began eating in small, precise bites. The whole time she kept glancing at Clara, quick, furtive looks, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Margaret has lessons this morning," Blackthorne said, "with Miss Ellsworth, her governess. But perhaps this afternoon you could join us for tea in the library." It wasn't really a question. Clara nodded anyway. "I'd like that." Margaret finished her toast, slid off the chair, and walked to the door. But before she left, she turned back one more time. Her gaze lingered on Clara for a long moment. Then she was gone, small footsteps echoing down the hallway. "She likes you," Blackthorne said quietly. "How can you tell?" She stayed. Usually she runs the moment someone new arrives. Clara thought about the silent little girl with the watchful eyes. What happened to her parents? Influenza swept through their village. Catherine, Eleanor's sister, tried to nurse the sick. She caught it. Her husband followed 3 days later. Blackthorne's voice was flat, reciting facts. Margaret was with neighbors when it happened. By the time I arrived, she'd already stopped speaking. "And she's been with you since then? Where else would she go?" "I'm her only living relative." He stood abruptly. "We should walk the grounds. People will be watching the house. We need to be seen together." Clara followed him outside into gardens that were beautiful even in winter's grip. Bare trees lined gravel paths, frost still clinging to the shadows. In the distance, she could see the edge of a lake, its surface like dark glass. They walked in silence at first. Then Clara said, "Tell me about Eleanor." Blackthorne's stride faltered. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to pretend to be your fiancé, I should know about your wife. People will expect me to reference her, to show proper respect. People will expect you to avoid mentioning her entirely. Then I'll do the unexpected." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "You don't need to know about Eleanor." "Maybe not, but I want to." For a moment she thought he'd refuse, then, "She was kind. Too kind for someone like me. She saw the best in everyone, even when there was no best to find." His jaw tightened. "I met her at a garden party. She spilled lemonade on my coat and apologized so earnestly that I couldn't help but laugh. We were married 6 months later." "Did you love her?" "I destroyed her. Does it matter if I loved her?" The rawness in his voice made Clara's chest tighten. "What happened?" "I was controlling, demanding. I wanted her to be something she wasn't, someone who could survive in society, who could play the games, match wits with vipers like Catherine Hartwick. But Eleanor wasn't built for that. She was gentle, trusting, and I pushed her too hard." He looked away toward the frozen lake. "She fell ill during a particularly brutal social season. Pneumonia. The doctors said she'd weakened herself trying to meet my expectations. She died 3 weeks later." "That's not, don't." The word was sharp. "Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. I know what I did." Clara understood then. The control, the walls, the careful distance he kept from everything. This was a man who'd convinced himself that caring was dangerous, that love was a weapon he couldn't be trusted to wield. "So you've been punishing yourself ever since," she said quietly. "I've been preventing it from happening again. By shutting everyone out? By turning yourself into stone? It's safer. For who?" He didn't answer, just started walking again, his pace faster now, like he was trying to outrun the conversation. Clara caught up, matching his stride. "You can't control everything, you know. Life doesn't work that way." "I'm aware." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've built a cage and locked yourself inside." "Better a cage than causing harm. That's not living. That's just existing." Blackthorne stopped so abruptly she nearly collided with him. When he turned, his eyes were blazing. "And what would you have me do, Miss Whitmore? Open myself up? Risk destroying someone else? Margaret has already lost everyone she loved. Should I get close enough that losing me would break her too? Maybe she needs you to try. You've known her for an hour. Don't presume to understand what she needs." "I understand what it's like to lose everything and have no one left who cares enough to take the risk." The words came out harder than she'd intended. Blackthorne's expression shifted, anger fading into something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "Your father," he said, "among others." They stood there on the frozen path, winter wind cutting between them, and Clara felt the precarious distance they'd maintained starting to crack. This was dangerous. They were supposed to be playing parts, maintaining fiction. Getting real defeated the purpose. But she couldn't seem to stop. "After my mother died, my father spent 2 years drinking himself to oblivion," she said. "I tried to help, tried to manage the estate, deal with creditors, keep us afloat. But he didn't want help. He wanted to drown. And when he finally succeeded, I was left with nothing but debt and shame and people telling me I should have tried harder. That's not your fault, isn't it? I knew he was suffering. I knew he needed more than I could give, but I kept trying to fix it, kept pushing, kept believing I could save him if I just worked hard enough." She met Blackthorne's gaze. "Sound familiar?" His jaw clenched. "It's not the same." "Isn't it? You blame yourself for Eleanor's death because you couldn't control her illness? I blame myself for my father's because I couldn't control his grief. We're both trying to carry guilt that isn't ours to carry. The difference is, I actually hurt Eleanor. My actions directly contributed. Did you force her to get sick? Did you physically prevent her from resting? I created the environment that weakened her. Or life created that environment, and you were just there." Clara took a step closer. "I'm not saying you're blameless. Maybe you were too hard on her. Maybe you made mistakes, but you're not solely responsible for her death, and living like you are doesn't honor her memory. It just wastes the life she left behind." Blackthorne stared at her like she'd struck him. Then he turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid, his footsteps crunching hard against the gravel. Clara didn't follow. She stood there alone in the cold garden, wondering if she'd just destroyed their fragile alliance before it had even properly begun. She made her way back to the house eventually, guided more by instinct than knowledge of the layout. A footman pointed her toward the drawing room, where Mrs. Winters was supervising the arrangement of fresh flowers. "Ah, Miss Whitmore, good. The first callers will be arriving within the hour. I've had tea prepared." "Callers already?" "News travels fast, miss, especially news like this." Mrs. Winters' expression was kind but firm. "You'll want to change. Something more formal. The lavender dress, I think." Clara let herself be led back upstairs, let Betsy fuss with her hair and laces, let herself be transformed into someone who looked like they belonged in a manor receiving society callers. But inside, she was still standing in that frozen garden, watching Blackthorne walk away from truth he couldn't face. The first caller arrived at 11. Lady Hartwick, of course. She swept into the drawing room in a gown of deep plum, her smile sharp as cut glass. "My dear Miss Whitmore, I simply had to come to see how you were settling in." Clara stood, grateful for the hours of deportment lessons her mother had insisted on before money ran out. "Lady Hartwick, how kind of you to call." "Not at all. After such surprising news, one must ensure all is well." She settled onto a settee like a queen claiming a throne. "Where's Adrian?" "Lord Blackthorne is attending to estate business." "How unfortunate. I was hoping to speak with him." Her gaze swept over Clara, missing nothing. "That dress is lovely. New?" "Borrowed, actually. My things haven't arrived yet." "How practical." Lady Hartwick accepted tea from a maid. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how exactly did you and Adrian meet? The announcement was rather vague on details." Here it was, the first real test. "Through mutual acquaintances," Clara said smoothly. "We were introduced at a small gathering several months ago." "Several months? How discreet of you both." The disbelief was thinly veiled. "I've known Adrian for years, you understand, since we were children. I would have thought he'd mentioned such a significant connection. Perhaps he valued privacy. Or perhaps there was nothing to mention until very recently." Lady Hartwick's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You must understand, dear, that Adrian is a very complex man. Damaged, one might say. He requires someone who understands his particular needs, someone from his world." "I understand him well enough." "Do you?" Lady Hartwick leaned forward slightly. "Do you know about his nightmares? The nights he wakes screaming Eleanor's name, the way he flinches when anyone mentions love?" Clara's fingers tightened on her teacup. "Everyone carries grief differently." "This isn't grief, dear. It's guilt. Adrian blames himself for Eleanor's death. Rightly so, many would say. He drove her to exhaustion, trying to mold her into something she wasn't. And now he's found you, a woman with nothing to lose, desperate enough to accept whatever scraps he offers." Her voice dropped, became almost gentle. "I'm trying to help you, Miss Whitmore, before you make a terrible mistake." "The only mistake would be listening to someone who's clearly jealous." Lady Hartwick's expression froze. "Jealous? You wanted him yourself. Everyone knows it. And now that he's chosen someone else, you're trying to sabotage it." Clara set down her cup with deliberate care. "I appreciate your concern, Lady Hartwick, but it's misplaced." For a moment, the mask slipped. Lady Hartwick's face went cold and hard, all pretense of kindness evaporating. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Adrian Blackthorne is not a fairy tale prince, and this will not end well for you. Mark my words, you'll be cast aside the moment he tires of whatever game he's playing." "Then I suppose that's my risk to take." Lady Hartwick stood abruptly. "Indeed. Good day, Miss Whitmore. I'm sure we'll speak again soon." She left in a swirl of plum silk, and Clara sagged back against the cushions, her heart pounding. First test passed. Barely. More callers came throughout the afternoon, some genuinely curious, others clearly looking for ammunition. Clara fielded them all with the same careful politeness, giving away nothing, revealing nothing, playing the part Blackthorne needed her to play. By 4 o'clock, she was exhausted. That's the last of them, Mrs. Winters announced, ushering out a particularly nosy baroness. You did very well, miss. I feel like I've been interrogated. You have been. Welcome to society. The housekeeper's smile was wry. Lord Blackthorne asked that you join him in the library for tea with Miss Margaret. Shall I show you the way? The library was enormous, 2 stories of books with a spiral staircase connecting the levels and windows that overlooked the gardens. Blackthorne sat in a leather chair near the fireplace. Margaret curled up on the floor beside him with a picture book. They both looked up as Clara entered. Miss Whitmore, Blackthorne said. His voice was neutral, but there was a question in his eyes. Are we all right? Clara nodded slightly. We're all right. How were the callers? He asked. Intrusive, judgmental, exactly as you predicted. Did anyone give you particular trouble? Lady Hartwick. Something dangerous flickered across his face. What did she say? That I'm making a mistake, that you're damaged beyond repair, that this will end badly. Clara sat down across from him. The usual. She had no right. She had every right. I'm an outsider. Of course she's going to test me. Clara glanced at Margaret, who was watching them both with solemn eyes. The question is whether I passed. Did you? I'm still here, aren't I? Margaret suddenly stood, walked over to Clara, and held out her picture book. Clara took it carefully. Would you like me to read to you? A nod. All right. Clara opened the book. Fairy tales, beautifully illustrated. Which story? Margaret pointed to a picture of a girl in a tower. Rapunzel. Good choice. She began to read, her voice soft in the quiet library. Margaret settled at her feet, leaning against her legs like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Blackthorne watched them both with an expression Clara couldn't quite read, something between fear and longing and surprise. When the story ended, Margaret looked up at Clara and smiled. Just a small, fleeting thing. But it was there. She doesn't smile, Blackthorne said quietly. Not anymore. Maybe she just needed a reason, Clara replied. Margaret tugged on Clara's sleeve, pointing to another story. You want another one? Another nod. Clara read 3 more stories before Margaret's governess appeared to collect her for supper. The little girl went reluctantly, looking back at Clara twice before finally disappearing through the doorway. Then it was just Clara and Blackthorne, alone in the firelight. Thank you, he said. For what? For being kind to her. You didn't have to. She's a child who's lost everything. Of course I'm kind to her. Most people aren't. They find her silence uncomfortable. They avoid her. Clara thought about the watchful little girl with the sad eyes. Their loss? Blackthorne studied her for a long moment. I owe you an apology for this morning. What I said was honest. I pushed too hard. No, you were right. He leaned back in his chair, his expression weary. I have been punishing myself, building cages, staying safe. A pause. But safe isn't the same as alive. Clara's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that for 3 days I'm supposed to pretend to care about you, to act engaged, to play a part. His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. But the pretending is getting complicated. Because? Because Margaret smiled at you. Because you stood up to Catherine Hartwick. Because you called me out this morning, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. He stood, moved to the window. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, a performance. And now? Now I'm not sure what it is. Clara stood too, her heart pounding. We still have 2 days left. I know. We can still keep this strictly business. Can we? She didn't know how to answer that, because somewhere between the ball last night and this moment, something had shifted. The walls were still there, but they'd developed cracks. And through those cracks, something real was starting to grow. I should go, Clara said. It's been a long day. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her first name. It sounded strange in his mouth, too intimate, too real. She turned back. Yes? Whatever happens after these 3 days, whatever we decide, I want you to know that I see you. Not as furniture or a companion or a mistake, as yourself. And I'm grateful. Clara's throat tightened. Don't be grateful yet. We still have to survive tomorrow. She left before he could respond, before she could do something stupid like ask what he meant by whatever we decide. Because this was temporary. A performance. A way to survive scandal and move on. Except it was starting to feel like something else entirely. And that terrified her more than anything Lady Hartwick could say. Clara didn't sleep that night either. She lay in the primrose room staring at shadows on the ceiling, replaying Blackthorne's words. Whatever happens after these 3 days, whatever we decide. As if there was a decision to make. As if this could be anything more than a temporary arrangement designed to save them both from ruin. Except Margaret had smiled, and Blackthorne had called her Clara. And somewhere in the last 36 hours, the pretense had started feeling less like armor and more like a cage she didn't want to escape. She was still awake when the screaming started. It came from somewhere deep in the house. Raw, anguished. The kind of sound that bypassed reason and went straight to instinct. Clara was out of bed and running before she'd fully registered what she was doing, her bare feet slapping against cold floors, her nightgown tangling around her legs. She followed the sound to the east wing's second floor. A door stood open, spilling lamplight into the hallway. Inside, she could hear a child's desperate sobbing and a man's voice, low and urgent. Clara burst through the doorway. Margaret's bedroom was chaos. The little girl thrashed in her bed, sheets twisted around her small body, her face flushed and slick with sweat. Blackthorne knelt beside her, trying to hold her still without hurting her, his own face pale and strained. "What happened?" Clara demanded. "Fever. It came on fast. She was fine at supper." His hands shook as he pressed them to Margaret's forehead. "I've sent for the doctor, but he's in the village, and with this weather—" Margaret convulsed, a rattling cough tearing from her chest. Then she went limp, her breathing shallow and rapid. "We need to cool her down," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now, before the fever gets worse." She moved without thinking, stripping back the heavy quilts, leaving only a thin sheet. Blackthorne stared at her like she'd gone mad. "She'll freeze. She'll cook her brain if we don't bring the fever down. Trust me." Clara turned to the washstand, found a basin and cloths. "Get fresh water, cold as you can manage, and send someone to make willow bark tea. I don't— Adrian." She used his first name deliberately, snapping him out of panic. "Water. Now." He moved. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, laying cool cloths on Margaret's burning forehead, her neck, her wrists. The little girl's eyes fluttered open, glazed, unfocused. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Shh," Clara murmured. "It's all right. You're safe." Blackthorne returned with a pitcher of water, his movements jerky with fear. Clara had seen that look before, on her mother's face when her father had locked himself in his study with a loaded pistol. Terror, barely held in check. "Help me sit her up," she said. Together they propped Margaret against the pillows. Clara dipped a cloth in the cold water, wrung it out, and began sponging the child's face and arms. Margaret whimpered but didn't fight. "Talk to her," Clara told Blackthorne. "What?" "She's scared. Talk to her. Let her hear your voice." He looked lost, then haltingly, "It's all right, Maggie. We're here. You're going to be fine." The words sounded hollow even to Clara's ears, but Margaret's breathing seemed to even out slightly, her body relaxing fractionally. They worked in silence for what felt like hours, changing cloths, sponging fevered skin, waiting for the doctor who might not come in time. At some point, a maid appeared with the willow bark tea. Clara managed to get a few sips down Margaret's throat before the girl turned her head away. "Come on, sweetheart," Clara coaxed. "Just a little more." Margaret's eyes opened. For a moment, they focused on Clara's face. Then her small hand lifted, fingers closing weakly around Clara's wrist. "I know," Clara whispered. "I know it hurts, but you have to fight." The little girl's grip tightened, then loosened. Then her eyes rolled back and she went completely still. "Margaret!" Blackthorne's voice cracked. Clara pressed her fingers to the child's throat, feeling for a pulse. It was there, faint and fast, but there. "She's breathing. She's just exhausted." "Are you certain?" "Look." Clara guided his hand to Margaret's chest. "Feel that? She's breathing." He sagged forward, his forehead nearly touching Margaret's. The fear in his face had transformed into something raw, something that looked like the moment before breaking. "I can't lose her," he said quietly. I can't lose another person. He stopped himself. Clara wanted to touch him, to offer comfort, but her hands were occupied with keeping watch over Margaret's too fast pulse. So she just said, "You won't. She's strong." "You don't know that."
I know she survived losing her parents. I know she survived 2 years of silence and grief. That takes strength most adults don't have. Blackthorne lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. He looked nothing like the cold, controlled lord from the ball. He looked human, terrified, real. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. My mother. She got pneumonia the winter before she died. We couldn't afford a doctor, so I nursed her myself." Clara changed the cloth on Margaret's forehead. "She lived through it. This time, anyway. But eventually isn't now. Now we focus on keeping Margaret breathing." The doctor arrived as dawn was breaking, a harried-looking man with a black bag and exhaustion in every line of his face. He examined Margaret thoroughly while Clara and Blackthorne waited, both of them too wired to sit. "Influenza," he pronounced finally. "The same strain that's been going through the village. She's past the crisis point, the fever's breaking, but she'll need constant care for the next few days, rest, fluids, and someone watching her around the clock." "I'll do it," Clara and Blackthorne said simultaneously. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "Both of you?" "I'm not leaving her," Blackthorne said flatly. "Neither am I," Clara added. The doctor looked between them, seemed to decide this wasn't worth arguing about, and started issuing instructions. Medicines to be given at specific intervals. Signs to watch for that would indicate worsening, things to avoid. Clara listened intently, committing every word to memory. When the doctor left, the sun was fully up, pale winter light streaming through the windows. Margaret slept on, her breathing easier now, her fever noticeably lower. The immediate danger had passed. Clara stood to leave. She needed to change, to wash, to do something other than hover. But Blackthorne caught her wrist. "Don't go." Please." The word was quiet, desperate. Clara looked at him and saw past the walls to the man underneath, the one who'd lost his wife, who'd failed to save his sister-in-law, who was convinced that everyone he loved was destined to die. "All right," she said, "I'll stay." They set up a sort of camp in Margaret's room, Mrs. Winters brought food they didn't eat and tea they drank mechanically. Betsy appeared periodically with fresh water and clean linens, and Clara and Blackthorne took turns sitting vigil, one watching while the other dozed in the armchair by the window. Around midday, Margaret woke properly. Her eyes were clearer, her fever down to just above normal. She looked at Clara, then at Blackthorne, and her small face crumpled. "Hey," Clara said softly, moving to the bedside. "You're all right. You're safe." Margaret's hand reached out, found Clara's, and held tight. "She was asking for you," Blackthorne said. "Earlier, when the fever was highest. She kept trying to say something but couldn't form the words." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm here now." She stayed by the bed while Blackthorne went to change his clothes and speak with the household staff. Stayed while Margaret drifted in and out of fevered sleep. Stayed when the little girl woke confused and frightened, whispering reassurances until she settled again. It wasn't until late afternoon that Margaret's eyes opened and stayed open, tracking Clara's movements with something approaching awareness. "How are you feeling?" Clara asked. Margaret's mouth moved. No sound came out, but Clara was learning to read her expressions. Tired, sore, confused. "You've been very sick, but you're getting better." Clara squeezed her hand gently. "Your uncle has barely left your side. He's been terrified." Something shifted in Margaret's face. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. "He loves you very much," Clara said, "even if he's not always good at showing it." Margaret's gaze moved past Clara to the doorway, where Blackthorne had just appeared with fresh tea. Their eyes met, uncle and niece both carrying too much grief, both afraid of what caring might cost. Then Margaret did something Clara hadn't seen before. She smiled. Not the small, fleeting thing from yesterday in the library. A real smile, warm and genuine and heartbreaking in its openness. Blackthorne froze. The tea tray shook in his hands. "Maggie," he whispered. The little girl's smile widened. Then, so quietly Clara almost missed it, she spoke. "Uncle."
The word was rough, unpracticed, but it was there. Blackthorne's face did something complicated. He set down the tea tray with shaking hands, crossed to the bed in 3 long strides, and dropped to his knees beside it. Margaret reached for him, and he pulled her into his arms, careful of her fragile state, his shoulders shaking with sobs he was trying desperately to contain. Clara backed away, giving them privacy. But before she reached the door, Margaret's hand shot out, catching her nightgown. "Stay," the little girl whispered. "Please stay." So Clara stayed. She sat in the armchair while Blackthorne held his niece, while the afternoon light faded to evening, while something in that room shifted and reformed into something new. Family, maybe. Or the beginning of it. Eventually, Margaret fell back asleep, still holding her uncle's hand. Blackthorne eased away carefully, tucking the blankets around her small form. When he turned to Clara, his face was wet with tears he hadn't bothered to hide. "She spoke," he said, like he still couldn't believe it. "She did. Because of you. Because she wanted to." Clara stood, her body aching from hours of sitting. Because she felt safe enough to try. "Clara." He crossed to her, stopped close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the raw emotion he'd finally stopped trying to bury. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You saved her life tonight. You stayed when you didn't have to. You gave her something I couldn't." "What's that?" "Hope that caring about someone doesn't always end in loss." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Adrian, I know. I know this was supposed to be temporary. A performance. 3 days, and then we go our separate ways." He took a breath. "But I can't pretend anymore. What I feel, what's happening here, it's not an act." Clara's world tilted. "You don't mean that. You're just exhausted and emotional, and I mean it." He reached for her hand, his grip warm and solid. "These past 2 days, watching you with Margaret, seeing you face down Catherine Hartwick, listening to you call me out on my cowardice, you've made me feel things I was convinced I'd never feel again." "That's not... We can't..." Clara pulled her hand away, panic rising. "This isn't real. It's circumstances, proximity. You're grateful and confusing that with... I'm not confused. For the first time in 5 years, I'm seeing clearly." "No." Clara backed toward the door. "No, you're not. You're traumatized and scared, and you nearly lost Margaret, and I was here, so now your brain is making connections that don't exist. Clara! This was a transaction, remember? 3 days to save both our reputations. That's all. That's what we agreed. Agreements can change. Not this one." She was at the door now, her hand on the knob. "I can't do this. I can't be the person you think I am." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm the daughter of a drunk who gambled away everything and then had the audacity to die and leave me to clean up his mess. I'm a paid companion who wears borrowed dresses and has nothing to my name. I can't be what you need." "You already are." The certainty in his voice was worse than doubt would have been. Clara shook her head, desperate to make him understand. "You don't know me. Not really. You know 3 days of performance. That's not enough to build anything real on. Then give me more time, let me know you." "Why? So you can realize I'm exactly as broken as you are? So we can destroy each other the way you destroyed Eleanor?" She regretted the words the moment they left her mouth. Blackthorne flinched like she'd struck him. "That's what you think?" he said quietly. "That I'd hurt you the way I hurt her? I think you're terrified of being alone, and I happen to be convenient." Clara forced the words out, hating herself for them. "I think in a week, when reality sets in, you'll realize this was a mistake. And I think you're running because you're scared of what this might mean." "Of course I'm scared. I have every right to be scared." Her voice cracked. "You're offering me something I've wanted my entire life, someone who sees me, who values me, who might actually care. And all I can think about is how much it's going to hurt when it ends." "It doesn't have to end. Everything ends. People die. People leave. People realize you're not worth the effort and move on to something better." "Is that what your father taught you?" The question landed like a blow. Clara's eyes burned. "My father taught me that love is a liability. That caring about people gives them the power to destroy you. That trusting someone to stay is the fastest path to being disappointed." Your father was wrong. My father was realistic. They stared at each other across the dim room. Margaret slept on, oblivious to the war being waged over her sickbed. Outside, night had fully fallen. I should go, Clara said. Where? To my room, to bed, to anywhere that isn't here pretending this is something it's not.
Well, one more day, Blackthorne said. That's what we agreed. One more day of the 3. I don't think I can. Please, he moved closer. One more day. Then, if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. But give me tomorrow. Give Margaret tomorrow. Let her wake up to both of us here. Clara looked past him to the small figure in the bed. Margaret, who'd lost everyone and was just starting to speak again. Margaret, who'd smiled and asked her to stay. Margaret, who deserved better than being caught in the middle of adult complications. All right, she whispered. One more day. Thank you. She left before he could say anything else, escaping to the primrose room where she finally let herself fall apart. Tears came hot and fast, soaking into the borrowed pillowcase. She cried for the father she'd failed to save, for the mother who'd died ashamed, for the life she'd lost and the one she was terrified to want. And she cried because Blackthorne was right. She was running, but running had kept her alive this long, and she didn't know how to stop. Morning came too soon. Clara woke to Betsy knocking softly, carrying a tray with toast and tea. His lordship asked me to tell you that Miss Margaret is much improved, the girl said. She's been asking for you. Clara dressed in the gray wool this time, something practical, unremarkable. When she reached Margaret's room, she found the little girl sitting up in bed, color back in her cheeks, eating breakfast while Blackthorne read to her from a book of poetry. He looked up when Clara entered. Their eyes met. The conversation from last night hung between them like smoke. Clara! Margaret's voice was still rough but excited. She set down her spoon and reached out. Clara went to her, let the child grab her hand, felt her heart crack a little more. How are you feeling? Better? Uncle says I was very sick. You were. You scared us both. Margaret looked between them, her expression turning serious. Are you fighting? No, Clara said quickly. Yes, Blackthorne said at the same time. Margaret's face fell. It's complicated, Clara tried to explain. We're working through some things. Don't leave, Margaret said. Please don't leave because of me. Oh, sweetheart, this has nothing to do with you. Then what? How did you explain fear to a 7-year-old? How did you tell a child who'd already lost everything that sometimes staying was scarier than leaving? Your uncle and I need to talk, Clara said finally. But whatever happens, it won't change how much I care about you. It was the most honest thing she'd said all morning. Margaret seemed to accept it, though her grip on Clara's hand didn't loosen. They spent the day in Margaret's room. The little girl was feeling well enough to be restless, demanding stories and games and attention. Clara read while Blackthorne worked through correspondence. They took turns coaxing Margaret to eat, to rest, to take her medicine. And underneath it all, the unspoken conversation from last night pulsed like a wound. By late afternoon, Margaret was drowsy again, the effort of being awake taking its toll. She fell asleep mid-sentence, her book sliding from her lap. Blackthorne caught it, set it aside, adjusted her blankets. She's resilient, he said quietly. She is. She gets that from her mother. Catherine was... He stopped. Eleanor's sister was the strongest person I knew. She survived poverty, social exile, a husband who drank too much. And she did it with grace. She sounds remarkable. She was. He looked at Clara. You remind me of her sometimes, that same quiet strength. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. We need to talk, Blackthorne said finally. I know. Not here. Come with me. He led her down to the library, closing the door behind them. The room was cold, no fire lit, winter light barely penetrating the tall windows. They stood facing each other like combatants preparing for a duel. You asked me yesterday why I'm really doing this, Blackthorne said. The truth is, I don't know anymore. It started as damage control. Then it became about Margaret. Now it's... He broke off, ran a hand through his hair. I'm not good at this. Feelings. Vulnerability. Eleanor used to say I'd rather solve problems than experience them. She wasn't wrong. No, but with you, I can't solve anything. I can't control what's happening, and it terrifies me. Clara's chest tightened. Then why not just let it go? End this now, before it gets worse? Because letting it go feels like giving up. And I've given up enough. I'm not a problem for you to fix, Adrian. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're trying to turn me into Eleanor, into someone you can save this time. The accusation hung in the air. Blackthorne's expression shuddered. Is that what you really think? I don't know what to think. You barely know me.
We've had, 3 real conversations? And now you're talking about changing agreements and giving us more time, and Clara's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. What happens when you realize I'm not who you thought I was? When the reality of my life sets in and you see that I'm just as damaged and difficult and impossible as me? The question stopped her. You think I don't see it? Blackthorne moved closer. You think I don't recognize the walls you've built? The way you keep everyone at a distance? The way you're convinced caring about anyone will end in disaster? I see it because I do the exact same thing. Then you know why this can't work. I know why we're both afraid. That's not the same as knowing it can't work. What's the difference? The difference is choice. Eleanor and I, we failed because I tried to change her into something she wasn't. I won't make that mistake again. But I also won't walk away from something real just because it's frightening. Clara shook her head. You don't understand. When my father died, I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable again. I'd never give someone that much power over my happiness, and now you're asking me to break that promise. I'm asking you to risk it. There's a difference. The outcome is the same. No, the outcome is unknown. That's different. They stood there in the cold library, 2 people terrified of the same thing, neither willing to back down. Clara wanted to run, wanted to pack her things and leave and never look back. But Margaret was upstairs. And the memory of her small voice saying, "Please stay," echoed in Clara's mind. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Mrs. Winters stood there, her face pale. "My lord, it's Miss Margaret. She's having trouble breathing." They ran. Margaret's room was chaos again. The little girl gasping for air, her skin taking on a bluish tint, her eyes wide with terror. The governess stood helplessly by while a maid wrung her hands. "What happened?" Blackthorne demanded. "She woke up coughing and couldn't stop. Then this—" Clara was already moving, tilting Margaret's head back, checking her airway. Nothing visible blocking it, but the wheezing was getting worse, each breath a struggle. "It's her lungs. The infection must have worsened." Clara looked at Blackthorne. "We need the doctor. Now." "He's in the next county. He won't make it in time." "Then we do this ourselves." She'd seen this before with her mother, knew the progression, the danger, the narrow window before it became too late. Steam. They needed steam to loosen the congestion. "Boil water," she ordered Mrs. Winters. "As much as you can. Bring it here with towels." Within minutes, the room was transformed into a makeshift steam chamber. Clara held Margaret over a basin of hot water, a towel draped over both their heads, coaching the little girl to breathe slowly, despite her panic. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. Good girl." Margaret's small body shook with the effort. Her fingernails dug into Clara's arms. But slowly, painfully, the breathing eased. The blue tint faded. The terror in her eyes diminished. "Don't stop," Clara murmured. "Keep breathing. You're doing so well." Blackthorne stood frozen across the room, his face ashen. This was his nightmare, losing another person he loved, being powerless to stop it. Clara could see it in every line of his body. "Adrian," she said sharply, "I need you." He blinked, focused. "What?" "Hold the towel. Keep the steam contained. I need both hands to support her." He moved immediately, taking over the towel duty while Clara adjusted Margaret's position. They worked in tandem, their movements synchronized by shared desperation, and Margaret kept breathing. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the little girl's breathing finally stabilized. Clara eased her back from the steam, wiping her face gently with a cool cloth. "There," she whispered. "You're all right. You're safe." Margaret collapsed against her, exhausted, but she was breathing, still breathing.
Blackthorne sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I can't do this. I can't keep watching her almost die. She's not dying. She's fighting. And what happens when the fight becomes too much? What happens when we can't save her? Clara wanted to offer reassurance, wanted to promise that everything would be fine, but she'd learned long ago that promises like that were lies. So instead she told him the truth. Then we love her anyway, for however long we get. He looked up at her, his eyes red. How are you so brave? I'm not brave, I'm terrified, but being terrified doesn't change what needs to be done. Margaret stirred in Clara's arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at her uncle, then at Clara, and despite everything, despite the fear and the sickness and the struggle, she smiled. Love you, she whispered. And Blackthorne broke. He crossed the room in 2 strides, gathered both of them into his arms, and wept. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire frame. Clara held Margaret with one arm and wrapped the other around him, anchoring them both. This was the moment. The breaking point, the place where all their walls came down and there was nothing left but raw, terrifying truth. Clara loved them, both of them. The broken man and the silent child. She loved them with a ferocity that scared her, that threatened everything she'd built to protect herself. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that loving them meant staying, meant risking everything, meant possibly destroying herself the way her father had destroyed himself. But as she held them both, felt their heartbeats against her own, Clara made a choice. The same choice Blackthorne had made when he'd offered her 3 days instead of abandoning her to scandal. She chose risk over safety, truth over protection, love over fear, even though she knew, with the same certainty that the sun would rise tomorrow, that it would probably destroy her in the end. They stayed like that until Margaret fell asleep again, her small body finally relaxed, her breathing steady. Only then did Blackthorne pull away, wiping his face roughly with the back of his hand. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. That was human, Clara finished. That was human. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression had fundamentally changed. The walls weren't just cracked anymore. They were gone. What remained was raw and exposed and honest in a way that made Clara's chest ache. I meant what I said earlier, he told her, about this not being pretend anymore, about wanting more than 3 days. I know. And? Clara glanced down at Margaret, sleeping peacefully despite everything. Ask me tomorrow, when we're both thinking clearly and she's out of danger. You're stalling. I'm being practical, one crisis at a time. But she reached for his hand as she said it, lacing their fingers together. Not a promise, just acknowledgement. He squeezed back, his grip warm and solid and real. Mrs. Winters appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. My lord, I've prepared the green guest room next door. You and Miss Whitmore should rest. I'll have Betsy sit with Miss Margaret. I'm not leaving her, Blackthorne said immediately. Neither am I, Clara added. The housekeeper's mouth twitched. Then I'll have cots brought in, but you'll both eat something first, and that's not a request. She left before either of them could argue. Clara found herself almost smiling despite the exhaustion dragging at her bones. She's terrifying, she murmured. She raised 3 sons and buried 2 husbands. Margaret's illness barely registers on her scale of catastrophes. Blackthorne stood slowly, his joints audibly protesting. But she's right. We need to eat. They took turns keeping watch while the other went downstairs for food. Clara returned first, carrying a tray of soup and bread that she picked at without really tasting. Then Blackthorne came back, looking marginally more composed, and they settled into the cots that had materialized while they were gone. The room was quiet, except for Margaret's breathing. Clara lay in the darkness, listening to it. In, out, steady and sure. Proof that they'd won this round, at least. Clara? Blackthorne's voice came from the darkness. Yes? Thank you for earlier, for knowing what to do. I told you, I watched my mother. Not just that. For staying, for choosing to stay even when you were terrified. Clara turned onto her side, though she couldn't see him in the dark. How did you know I was terrified? Because I was too, and I recognized it in you. A pause. We're quite the pair, aren't we? 2 people convinced that caring will destroy us. Maybe it will. Maybe. But maybe it won't. They fell silent after that. Clara thought she wouldn't sleep, that her mind would keep churning through possibilities and fears. But exhaustion won out, dragging her down into darkness. She woke to gray morning light and the sound of Margaret's voice. "Is Clara still here?" Clara sat up so fast her head spun. Margaret was awake, propped against her pillows, looking infinitely better than she had any right to. Blackthorne sat on the edge of her bed, fully dressed despite the early hour. "I'm here," Clara said, climbing out of the cot. Her borrowed nightgown was wrinkled beyond repair. "How are you feeling?" "Hungry." Blackthorne laughed, an actual laugh, surprised and relieved and achingly genuine. "That's a good sign, Mrs. Buss." Winters appeared as if summoned, carrying a tray with toast and soft-boiled eggs. "The doctor's here, my lord. Arrived about an hour ago. He's waiting downstairs." This doctor was different from the harried village physician. Older, more distinguished, carrying an air of expensive competence. He examined Margaret thoroughly, asked detailed questions about her symptoms, and finally pronounced her past the worst of it. She'll need rest and careful monitoring for another week. But barring complications, she should make a full recovery. He looked at Clara. "Your quick thinking with the steam likely saved her life, young lady. Well done." "I just did what needed doing. Many people wouldn't have known what was needed, or wouldn't have had the courage to act." He packed up his instruments. "Lord Blackthorne, a word?" They stepped into the hallway. Clara stayed with Margaret, helping her eat toast in small, careful bites. The little girl watched her with those solemn, too knowing eyes. "You're not leaving, are you?" Margaret asked suddenly. Clara's hand stilled. "What makes you think I'm leaving?" "Because everyone leaves eventually. Mama and Papa left. Even Uncle Adrian leaves sometimes, even though he doesn't go anywhere. He just gets quiet and far away." The observation was devastating in its accuracy. Clara set down the toast, took Margaret's small hand in hers. "I'm not planning to leave," she said carefully, "but I need to be honest with you. Your uncle and I, what we have is complicated. We're still figuring things out." "Do you love him?" The question hit like a physical blow. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. How did you explain adult complications to a 7-year-old? "I care about him very much," she said finally. "And I care about you, but love it's scary. It means risking getting hurt." "Everything is scary," Margaret said with the blunt wisdom of children. "But you do it anyway if it matters." Before Clara could respond, Blackthorne returned. His expression was strange, somewhere between determined and terrified. "The doctor's gone," he said, "and we need to talk." "Now?" "Now." Mrs. Winters materialized to sit with Margaret. Clara followed Blackthorne down to his study, a room she hadn't seen before, all dark wood and leather, and books that looked actually read rather than decorative. He closed the door, turned to face her. 3 days are up." Clara's stomach dropped. "What?" "Today is the 3rd day. Our agreement was 3 days of pretending to be engaged. Then we'd part ways and you'd receive a settlement." "I know what the agreement was. So we need to decide. Do we honor it or do we change it?" Clara stared at him. After everything they'd been through, the ball, the callers, Margaret's illness, that moment last night when all their walls had come down, he was really asking her to choose. Right now. Without any more time to think. "That's not fair," she said. "Life isn't fair, but it does require decisions." "Adrian, I'm in love with you." The words detonated in the quiet study. Clara felt the world tilt. "You can't be. We've known each other 3 days. 4 if you count today, and I know it's absurd. I know it's too fast and probably insane. But when Margaret couldn't breathe last night, when I thought we might lose her, all I could think was that I couldn't do it without you, that somewhere in the last 72 hours, you'd become essential. That's not love. That's dependence. It's both." He moved closer. "I don't need you to save me, Clara. I need you to remind me that being saved is possible. There's a difference." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm just as broken as you are and we end up destroying each other? Then we'll be broken together, which is better than being broken alone." "You don't know that." "Neither do you. That's the point. We don't know, but we can find out." He reached for her hands, gently separating them, holding them in his. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for real.
whatever that looks like. Clara looked down at their joined hands. His were larger, scarred from old injuries, steady despite the fear she could see in his eyes. And she thought about Margaret asking if she was leaving, about Mrs. Hartley's calculated cruelty, about the choice between safety and risk.
If I say yes, she said slowly, if I agree to make this real, what does that actually mean? Marriage?
Because I need you to understand, I won't be Eleanor. I won't smile and defer and make myself smaller to fit into your world.
I don't want you to.
I'll argue with you. I'll call you out when you're being an ass. I'll probably make a terrible society wife because I don't care about half the things they care about. Good. And I'm terrified. Constantly. Of losing people. Of not being enough. Of repeating my father's mistakes. So am I. They stared at each other across the inches separating them. Then Clara took a breath and jumped. Yes, she said. Yes to making this real. Yes to risking it. Yes to whatever this becomes. Blackthorne's face transformed. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. Something that looked like hope. You're certain? No, but I'm choosing it anyway. He kissed her then, not gentle or tentative, but fierce and desperate and real. Clara kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into it. All her fear and hope, and the terrifying certainty that this might destroy them both, but at least they'd burn together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Blackthorne rested his forehead against hers. We should tell Margaret, he said. We should tell everyone. Are you ready for that? Society won't be kind. Clara thought about Lady Hartwick's sharp smile, about Mrs. Hartley's calculated betrayal, about every person who'd looked through her like she was furniture. Let them talk, she said. I'm done caring what they think. They found Margaret in her room, playing with a set of wooden blocks while Mrs. Winters supervised. The little girl looked up as they entered, and whatever she saw in their faces made her smile. You're staying, she said to Clara. I'm staying. Forever? Clara looked at Blackthorne. He nodded slightly. Forever, Clara confirmed. Margaret launched herself at them both, nearly knocking Clara over. They ended up in a tangle of arms and laughter, something warm and bright and entirely new blooming in Clara's chest. This was family, messy and imperfect and terrifying, but real. By noon, the news had spread through the household. Mrs. Winters cried, then covered it by scolding everyone for standing around instead of working. Betsy hugged Clara, then blushed and apologized for being forward. Even the groundskeeper, an ancient man who rarely spoke, nodded approvingly. Now comes the hard part, Blackthorne said as they prepared for afternoon callers. Convincing society this is legitimate. You mean convincing them I'm not a fortune-hunting charlatan who trapped you? Something like that. Clara adjusted her dress. Another borrowed one, though Mrs. Winters had promised her own clothes would arrive by evening. How do we do that? We show them something they can't deny. We show them what we are. The first caller was, predictably, Lady Hartwick. She swept into the drawing room in a gown of deep burgundy, her expression carefully neutral. But her eyes betrayed her, assessing, calculating, looking for weakness. Adrian, Miss Whitmore, I heard about Margaret's illness. How dreadful. She's recovering, Blackthorne said coolly. I'm so relieved. Lady Hartwick settled onto a settee, arranging her skirts with deliberate precision. Though I must say, the timing is rather interesting. 3 days ago, Miss Whitmore arrives wearing white to your ball. Yesterday, your engagement is announced, and now Margaret falls ill, and Miss Whitmore plays the devoted nurse. Her smile was razor sharp, almost as if it were choreographed. Catherine, Blackthorne's voice was ice. Say what you mean. I mean that some might wonder if this entire situation has been staged. A fallen gentlewoman sees an opportunity and seizes it. A lonely man, desperate for companionship, believes her performance. It's quite the romance. Clara felt anger flash hot through her veins. But before she could respond, Blackthorne stood. You're right, he said. Lady Hartwick blinked. What? You're right that it seems staged, because it was. The white dress was Mrs. Hartley's manipulation, not Clara's choice. The engagement announcement was damage control. And yes, Clara did nurse Margaret through her illness. He moved to stand beside Clara's chair. But what you're missing, what you've always missed, is that performance can become real. That sometimes the best things in life start as desperate measures and transform into something worth keeping. Adrian, I'm in love with her, Catherine. Actually, genuinely in love. Not because she trapped me or because I'm desperate. Because she's brave enough to see past my mistakes and stubborn enough to call me on my nonsense and compassionate enough to care about a silent child everyone else had given up on. Clara's breath caught. This was it. The public declaration. The point of no return. Lady Hartwick's face went white, then red. You cannot be serious. She's nobody. She has nothing. Her father was a drunk who... Her father's mistakes are not hers to carry. Blackthorne's voice was steel. Just as my mistakes with Eleanor are not yours to weaponize, you've spent 5 years waiting for me to come back to you, Catherine. I won't. Not now. Not ever. And using Clara to punish me for that choice is beneath you. I never... You proposed to me 3 times after Eleanor died. I declined each time. You spread rumors that I was unstable, dangerous, that no woman should trust me. And when Clara appeared, you saw your chance to prove it. He leaned forward slightly. You failed. Because Clara isn't you. She doesn't see me as a prize to win or a reputation to leverage. She sees me as I am, and for reasons I'm still trying to understand, she's choosing me anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Hartwick stood abruptly, her composure shattered. You'll regret this, she said, her voice shaking. Both of you. Perhaps, Clara said quietly, finding her voice. But it will be our regret. Not yours. Lady Hartwick left without another word, her exit less graceful than her entrance. The moment the door closed, Blackthorne sagged slightly. That was terrifying, Clara finished, and necessary, and possibly the bravest thing I've ever seen you do. She'll make this difficult. She has influence, connections. Let her try. We have something she doesn't. What's that? The truth. More callers came throughout the afternoon, some genuinely kind, others clearly fishing for scandal. Clara fielded them all with Blackthorne at her side, both of them presenting a united front. And with each visitor, the story became more real, more solid. By evening, Clara was exhausted but exhilarated. They'd survived the worst of it. Society might gossip, might speculate, but they couldn't deny what they'd seen, 2 people choosing each other despite everything. Dinner was a quiet affair, just the 3 of them. Margaret was well enough to come downstairs, though she tired quickly and was sent back to bed before dessert. After she left, Clara and Blackthorne sat in companionable silence, the day's battles finally behind them. I have something for you, Blackthorne said suddenly. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, set it on the table between them. Clara stared at it. Adrian, open it. Inside was a ring, not the ostentatious diamonds she'd expected, but a simple gold band with a single sapphire, deep blue, the color of twilight. It was my mother's, he said quietly. She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone who deserved it, someone brave. Clara's eyes burned. I'm not brave. You're the bravest person I know. He took the ring from the box, held it up. A question. Clara extended her hand, watched as he slid the ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. This is real now, she said. No more pretending. No more pretending, he agreed. They were still sitting there when Mrs. Winters appeared, her expression troubled. My lord, there's someone here to see Miss Whitmore. She says it's urgent. Clara's stomach dropped. Who? Mrs. Hartley. Clara's former employer stood in the foyer, looking significantly less composed than the last time Clara had seen her. Her dress was rumpled, her hair slightly askew, and her eyes held something that might have been fear. Miss Whitmore, she said, her voice tight. I need to speak with you, privately. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Lord Blackthorne. Mrs. Hartley's jaw clenched. Then, very well, I came to apologize. The words seemed to cost her physical pain. Clara crossed her arms. Apologize for what specifically? For the dress? For the manipulation? For putting you in an impossible position? Mrs. Hartley took a breath. Lady Hartwick came to see me this afternoon. She was angry. She made certain accusations about my character, my motives. She threatened to destroy my reputation if I didn't publicly denounce you as a schemer. And, Clara asked coldly, And I told her to go to hell. Blackthorne made a sound that might have been a laugh. Clara just stared. Why? She demanded. Because I've spent 3 years rebuilding my social standing after my husband's gambling debts nearly destroyed us. I've clawed my way back to respectability, and I did it by being exactly like them, calculating, cruel, willing to sacrifice anyone for advantage. Mrs. Hartley's voice cracked. But watching Catherine Hartwick threaten to do to me what I did to you, it made me see myself clearly for the first time, and I hated what I saw. That doesn't excuse what you did. No, it doesn't. But I'm asking for forgiveness anyway. Not because I deserve it, but because you deserve to hear that I was wrong. She reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope. I also wrote a letter to the editors of the 3 major papers, explaining what really happened, how I manipulated you, how the white dress was my doing, not yours. It goes out tomorrow morning. Clara took the envelope with numb fingers. Inside was exactly what Mrs. Hartley had described, a full confession, laying out her scheme in brutal detail. This will destroy your reputation, Clara said. Yes, but it will save yours. That seems like a fair trade. They stood in the foyer, 3 people caught in the complicated web of society's games. Then Clara made a choice. Don't send it. Mrs. Hartley's eyes widened. What? Don't send the letter. My reputation is already recovering, but if you send this, you'll be ruined. And while I'm angry at what you did, I don't want to destroy you. After everything, I'm choosing to be better than the system that hurt us both. Clara held out the letter. Take it. Rebuild your life without this hanging over you, but never do something like this again. Mrs. Hartley took the letter with shaking hands. Tears streaked down her face. Thank you, she whispered. You're kinder than I deserve. I'm not kind, I'm practical. Destroying you won't undo what happened. It will just create more damage. Clara met her gaze. But if I hear you've manipulated anyone else like you manipulated me, I will personally ensure everyone knows what you are. Understood? Understood. Mrs. Hartley left and Clara sagged against Blackthorne. That was remarkably generous, he said. That was self-preservation. If she'd sent that letter, the scandal would have exploded all over again. This way it dies quietly. Still, you could have let her burn. I've spent too much of my life watching people burn. I'm tired of it. He kissed the top of her head. You're going to be a terrible society wife. I warned you. They stood there in the quiet foyer holding each other, while outside the winter night settled over Blackthorne Manor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Society's continued scrutiny, the work of building a real relationship, the constant navigation of their complicated world. But tonight, they'd won. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Clara looked down at the sapphire ring on her finger, catching lamplight and throwing it back in brilliant sparks. A symbol of choice, of risk, of 2 broken people deciding that maybe, just maybe, they could be broken together and call it whole. We should check on Margaret, she said. Together? Together. They climbed the stairs side by side, their shadows merging on the wall. And for the first time since her father had died and her world had shattered, Clara Whitmore felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile kind that shatters at the first setback, but the stubborn, resilient kind that survives storms and keeps growing anyway. The kind that builds families from ruins and finds love in the most unlikely places. The kind that just might last. Sonnet 4. 5. Margaret was asleep when they reached her room, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. The lamplight painted her in gold and shadow, making her look younger than 7. Fragile. But Clara knew better now. This child was steel wrapped in softness. She's stronger than both of us, Clara whispered. Blackthorne adjusted the blankets over his niece with careful hands. She has to be. She's survived things we can't imagine. So have you. He looked at her over Margaret's sleeping form. So have you. They stood there for a moment, 2 people who'd been broken in different ways, watching a child who'd been broken worse. And Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not just hope, but purpose. This was why she'd said yes. Not just for herself, not just for him. For all 3 of them. For the family they could build from ruins. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was having tea with Margaret in the library when Mrs. Winters appeared, her expression carefully blank. Miss Whitmore, there's a gentleman here asking for you. He says he's your uncle. Clara's teacup clattered against the saucer. My uncle? You have an uncle? Margaret asked, looking up from her picture book. Yes, my mother's brother. But we haven't spoken in years. Not since he'd refused to help after her father's death, claiming the scandal would damage his own standing.
What does he want? He didn't say, but he's quite insistent. Clara found Thomas Pemberton in the drawing room examining a painting with the critical eye of someone assessing value. He turned when she entered, and his face arranged itself into an expression of concern that looked practiced. Clara, my dear, I heard the most extraordinary news. Did you? Her voice was flat. An engagement to Lord Blackthorne. Quite a coup for someone in your circumstances. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to congratulate you personally. After 5 years of silence. Now, Clara, let's not dwell on the past. Family is family, after all. And with your new position, I thought perhaps we might reconnect. My daughter Elizabeth is looking for a sponsor into society. No. Pemberton blinked. I'm sorry? No. You don't get to ignore me when I needed help, then show up now expecting favors. Clara stood straighter. You turned your back on me when my father died. You wouldn't even attend the funeral because it might associate you with his scandal. And now you want me to sponsor your daughter into the very society that destroyed my family? I was protecting my own children. You were protecting your reputation. There's a difference. Clara moved toward the door. I'm afraid I can't help you, Uncle. I'm still learning to navigate society myself. Perhaps in a few years, when I'm more established. Never, she meant. But she said it with enough politeness that he couldn't quite call it a refusal. Pemberton's face reddened. You're making a mistake. You think Blackthorne will shield you forever? Men like him tire of their toys eventually. And when he does, you'll have nothing again. No family, no position, no... Get out. Blackthorne stood in the doorway, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. You're in my house speaking to my fiancée. Leave. Now. Pemberton sputtered, tried to recover, but Blackthorne simply stared him down until the older man collected his hat and fled. Once he was gone, Clara sagged against the wall. You heard all that? Most of it. Blackthorne crossed to her, his expression dark. Are you all right? I should have expected it. Everyone who ignored me when I had nothing will come crawling back now that I have something. Then we'll deal with them together. Turn away whoever you want turned away. Even family? Especially family. Blood doesn't entitle anyone to cruelty. Clara looked at him, this man who'd been so cold at their first meeting, who'd slowly revealed the wounded person underneath, who was choosing every day to try. Thank you, she said. For what? For backing me, even when you didn't have all the information. I had enough. I saw your face. He cupped her cheek gently. Besides, I'm starting to understand that the people who abandoned you don't deserve to share in what you've built. Margaret appeared in the doorway, looking between them with worried eyes. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Clara assured her, holding out a hand. Margaret took it, her small fingers warm. Just some adult complications. The bad kind? The manageable kind. They spent the rest of the morning together, the three of them reading in the library, Margaret's health improving with each passing hour. Around noon, Blackthorne was called away to meet with his steward. Clara stayed with Margaret, who was practicing her writing. Clara, the little girl said suddenly, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to marry Uncle Adrian? Clara set down her book. Yes. Is that all right with you? Margaret chewed her lip, considering. What happens to me? The question gutted her. Clara pulled the child into her lap, holding her close. Nothing bad. I promise. You stay here, in your home, with your uncle, and with me. We become a family, all three of us. But what if you have babies? Won't you send me away? Never. Margaret, listen to me. Clara tilted the girl's chin up, making sure she could see her face. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if there will be other children. But I know this. You are part of this family, not because you have to be, because we choose you, both of us. Always. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You promise? I promise. The little girl buried her face in Clara's shoulder and cried, deep, wrenching sobs that felt like years of fear and grief finally finding release. Clara held her through it, rocking slightly, whispering reassurances until the storm passed. When Margaret finally pulled back, her face was blotchy but calmer.
I'm glad you're staying. So am I. Even when Uncle Adrian is grumpy?
Clara laughed despite herself. Even then. Good. Because he's grumpy a lot. That evening, Blackthorne announced they were holding a dinner party. A what? Clara stared at him across the dinner table. A formal dinner. Here. In 3 days. He cut his roast beef with deliberate precision. We need to establish ourselves as a united front. Show society that this is real and permanent. 3 days isn't enough time to plan a formal dinner. Mrs. Winters has been planning formal dinners in 3 days since before we were born. She'll manage. Clara looked at Margaret, who was trying to hide a smile behind her napkin. Did you know about this? The little girl nodded. Traitor, Margaret giggled, an actual giggle, bright and clear. The sound made Clara's chest ache in the best way. Who are we inviting? She asked Blackthorne. Everyone. The families who matter, the ones who've been gossiping, the ones who are undecided. His expression was determined. We're going to show them exactly who you are, and they're going to accept it. Or what? Or they'll find themselves cut from the social calendar of one of the wealthiest families in England. He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. I may not care about society, but I have influence in it. Time to use that. Clara should have been nervous. Should have been terrified of facing down the entire upper crust in one evening, but instead she felt something else. Anticipation. Readiness. Let them come. Let them judge. She'd survived worse. The next 3 days were chaos. Mrs. Winters transformed into a general marshalling troops, directing servants in a flurry of cleaning, polishing, and preparation. Clara's own clothes finally arrived from London, simple but well-made dresses that fit properly. And a modiste appeared with fabric samples for a new gown. You'll need something special for the dinner, Blackthorne said when Clara protested the expense. I have dresses. You have serviceable gowns. I want you in something that makes them stare. The modiste, a shrewd Frenchwoman named Madame Bisset, circled Clara with an assessing eye. She has good bones, good posture, with the right gown. She snapped her fingers. I know exactly what to make. 2 days later, the gown arrived. Clara stared at it in disbelief. It wasn't white. Too much association with that first disastrous ball. Instead, it was deep emerald green silk that brought out the color in her eyes. The bodice was fitted, the neckline modest but elegant. No excessive frills or decorations, just clean lines and expert tailoring that made her look taller, stronger, more confident. It's perfect, Margaret breathed. Clara had to agree. The evening of the dinner, she dressed with Betsy's help, her hands surprisingly steady. The girl pinned her hair into an elaborate style, woven through with small gold pins. The sapphire ring gleamed on her finger. You look like a queen, Betsy said softly. I look terrified. Queens are probably terrified too. They just don't show it. Fair point. Clara descended the stairs to find Blackthorne waiting in the foyer. He'd dressed formally. Black coat, perfectly tied cravat, not a hair out of place, but his eyes softened when he saw her. You're staring, Clara said. You're stunning. I'm the same person I was this morning. I know, but now everyone else will see it too. He offered his arm. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. The dining room had been transformed. Candles blazed in silver candelabras. The table gleamed with crystal and china. Hothouse flowers spilled from arrangements at perfect intervals. It looked like something from a storybook. The guests began arriving. Lord and Lady Morrison, the Duchess of Westfield, Sir Charles Pembroke and his wife. Even, Clara noted with grim satisfaction, Lady Hartwick, her expression carefully neutral, her burgundy gown impeccable. They gathered in the drawing room for pre-dinner drinks. Clara stood beside Blackthorne, feeling the weight of their stares, their assessment. Margaret was upstairs with her governess, too young for formal dinners, but she'd made Clara promise to tell her everything afterward. Miss Whitmore, the Duchess of Westfield approached, a formidable woman with iron gray hair and eyes like a hawk. I've heard quite a bit about you. I'm sure you have, Your Grace. Most of it contradictory. Some say you're a fortune hunter. Others say you saved Lord Blackthorne's niece from certain death. She sipped her sherry.
Which is it? Clara met her gaze directly.
Both, perhaps, or neither. I wore a white dress I didn't know was significant. I helped a sick child because that's what decent people do. And I'm marrying Lord Blackthorne because I choose to. Choose to. Interesting phrase. The Duchess considered her. Most women would say they're marrying for love. I am. But love is also a choice. Every day we choose whether to honor it or abandon it. Something shifted in the Duchess's expression.
Your mother was Mary Ann Sutton, wasn't she,
Before she married? Yes. I knew her years ago before her marriage. She was the brightest girl in any room. Sharp, clever, wasted on that fool Whitmore. The Duchess's voice softened fractionally. She would have liked you, the woman you've become. Clara's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Society will test you. They'll wait for you to fail, to prove you're not worthy of this position. You'll need to be stronger than strong. I've been poor, dismissed, and invisible. I think I can handle judgment from people who've never struggled. The Duchess smiled, genuinely smiled. Yes, I think you can. Dinner was announced. Blackthorne led Clara to her seat at his right, the position of honor, making his choice unmistakably clear. Lady Hartwick sat across the table, her expression unreadable. The meal progressed through multiple courses. Conversation flowed around topics of politics, estate management, the upcoming season. Clara contributed when appropriate, stayed silent when wise. She caught Blackthorne's eye several times, saw the pride there. Then, during the fish course, Lady Hartwick spoke. Miss Whitmore, I must apologize. The table fell silent. Every eye turned to them. For what, Lady Hartwick? Clara asked carefully. For my behavior when you first arrived. I was unkind. I made assumptions based on circumstance rather than character. Catherine Hartwick's voice was steady, but Clara could see the effort it cost her. I've spent considerable time reflecting, and I realize I owe you an apology. You've shown grace and strength where I showed only jealousy. It was a public capitulation, a surrendering of power. Clara could destroy her right now with a single cutting remark, could make her look foolish in front of everyone who mattered. Instead, she said, Thank you, Lady Hartwick. I appreciate your honesty. We've all made mistakes. What matters is how we move forward. The relief on Catherine's face was visible. Around the table, Clara could see expressions shifting, calculation turning to respect, judgment to acceptance. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room while the men stayed for port and cigars. Clara found herself surrounded by women who'd been gossiping about her for days. You handled that beautifully, the Duchess said. Catherine Hartwick doesn't apologize easily. For her to do so publicly, you've won a powerful ally. Or neutralized a dangerous enemy, Lady Morrison added. Either way, well played. Clara wanted to tell them it wasn't strategy, that she'd simply chosen kindness because she was tired of cruelty. But she was learning that in society, kindness and strategy often look the same. When the men rejoined them, Blackthorne came directly to Clara's side. They circulated together, speaking with guests, accepting congratulations on their engagement. And with each conversation, Clara felt the narrative changing. She wasn't the upstart companion anymore. She was Lord Blackthorne's chosen bride, a woman who'd saved his niece, someone worth knowing. The party broke up near midnight. As the last carriage pulled away, Clara sagged against the closed door. That was exhausting. You were magnificent. Blackthorne pulled her close. Did you see Morrison's face when you quoted Tacitus? I thought he'd fall over. I read a lot when I was a companion. There wasn't much else to do. Well, it paid off. You impressed everyone who matters. Clara looked up at him. I didn't do it to impress them. I know. That's why it worked. They climbed the stairs together, stopping at Margaret's room. The little girl was supposed to be asleep but sat up the moment they entered. Tell me everything, she demanded in a loud whisper. So they did. Clara sat on one side of the bed, Blackthorne on the other, and they recounted the evening, the guests, the conversations, Lady Hartwick's apology. Margaret listened with wide eyes, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts. "Did they like you?" she asked Clara. "I think so, eventually." "Good, because you're part of our family now. They have to like you." Clara's chest tightened. Our family. Such simple words.
Such profound meaning. "Time for sleep," Blackthorne said, kissing Margaret's forehead. "Actual sleep this time." "But I'm not tired. Bed. Now." Margaret grumbled, but settled under the covers. As they reached the door, her small voice stopped them. "I'm glad you both chose me." Clara looked back. "We're glad you chose us too." The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Margaret's health continued improving. Clara began taking on responsibilities around the estate, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. She met with Mrs. Winters about household matters. She worked in the library, cataloging books that had been neglected for years. She wrote letters on Blackthorne's behalf, managing social obligations with efficiency that surprised even her. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Blackthorne Manor transformed. Rooms that had been closed were opened. Staff who'd been going through motions started caring again. Laughter echoed through hallways that had been silent. 3 weeks after the dinner party, Blackthorne found Clara in his study, reviewing estate accounts. "You've reorganized my filing system," he observed. "Your old system made no sense. This is better." "I don't doubt it, but you didn't have to." "I want to. This is my home now, too. I should know how it runs." She looked up from the ledger. "Is that all right?" He crossed to her, tilted her chin up, kissed her softly. "It's more than all right. It's perfect." "Nothing's perfect." "No, but us, it's close enough." The wedding was set for spring. A small ceremony, they'd agreed, just family and close friends, nothing ostentatious or designed to impress. But as winter faded and the first crocuses pushed through frozen ground, Clara realized something had changed. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of society, not of failure, not even of loss. Because she'd found something worth the risk. The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs to the library, thinking to read until exhaustion won. But she found Blackthorne already there, staring into the fire. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too many thoughts." Clara settled beside him on the settee. "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" "Both. I keep thinking about Eleanor, about how I failed her, and then I think about you and Margaret, and I'm terrified I'll make the same mistakes." "You won't. You don't know that. I know you're not the same person you were 5 years ago. I know you've learned from what happened, and I know you're trying." Clara took his hand. "That's all anyone can do. Try. And when we fail, because we will fail sometimes, we'll pick ourselves up and try again. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just necessary." He pulled her close, his arms solid around her. They sat there in the firelight, two people on the edge of something new, holding on to each other against the unknown. "I love you," he said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, I love you. I love you too. Even when you're grumpy and controlling and convinced you know best. I do know best. See? Exactly what I mean." He laughed, and the sound was free and genuine and full of possibility. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Spring had arrived overnight, it seemed. Trees budding, flowers blooming, the world remaking itself. Clara dressed in cream silk, not white. A small rebellion, a private joke. Margaret helped, her small fingers careful with the buttons. "You look like a princess," the little girl said. "I feel like myself," which is better than a princess. The ceremony was in the manor's private chapel, old stone walls, stained glass windows throwing colored light across the floor. The vicar, who'd known Blackthorne since childhood, smiled as he read the vows. Clara spoke her promises clearly, without hesitation. To love, to honor, to choose him every day. Blackthorne's voice was rough with emotion as he pledged the same. When it was done, when they were married, he kissed her with the chapel full of witnesses, and Clara felt something inside her finally settle. This was home. Not the building, but these people, this choice, this terrifying, wonderful leap into the unknown.
The celebration afterward was louder than planned. Margaret ran through the gardens with other children, her laughter carrying on the spring breeze. Guests toasted the couple. Even Lady Hartwick offered genuine congratulations. As evening fell, Clara found herself alone on the terrace, watching the sun set over the gardens. Blackthorne found her there, slipping an arm around her waist. "Regretting it already?" he teased. "Not even a little." Clara leaned into him. "I was just thinking about how much has changed. 4 months ago, I was wearing a white dress I didn't understand. Now I'm married to you, helping raise Margaret, managing an estate. It's surreal." "Good surreal or bad surreal?" "The best kind. The kind where you can't quite believe it's real, but you're grateful anyway." Margaret appeared in the doorway, tugging on Clara's dress. "Come dance. They're playing the waltz you like." Clara looked at Blackthorne. He nodded. "Go. I'll join you in a moment." She let Margaret pull her back inside into the warm glow of the ballroom. The music swelled, and as Clara danced with the little girl who'd stolen her heart, watching her new husband across the room, she felt something she'd never quite believed in before. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. The certainty that whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever pain, whatever joy, she wouldn't face it alone. Years later, when people asked Clara about her unconventional path to becoming Lady Blackthorne, she always told the truth. It hadn't been a fairy tale. It had been messy and terrifying and complicated. She'd made mistakes. So had Adrian. They'd hurt each other, failed each other, stumbled through the early days of their marriage figuring out how to be partners instead of just survivors. But they'd also built something real. A family that wasn't defined by blood, but by choice. A household that rang with Margaret's laughter, and later with the voices of 3 more children, 2 boys and another girl, each as stubborn and fearless as their mother. Blackthorne Manor became known not for its wealth or influence, but for something else. Warmth, acceptance, a place where people were valued for who they were rather than who they were supposed to be. And late at night, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and Adrian would sit in the library where they'd first really talked. Sometimes they'd read. Sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence. Sometimes they'd argue about estate management or child rearing, or whose turn it was to deal with Margaret's latest rebellion. But always, always, they chose each other. The white dress that had started everything was packed away in a trunk in the attic. Clara kept it not as a reminder of scandal, but as proof of transformation. Evidence that mistakes could become miracles. That the worst nights could lead to the best mornings. That sometimes the thing that breaks you open is exactly what lets the light in. On Clara's 40th birthday, Margaret, now a young woman herself, engaged to a kind man who loved her selective silence, gave her mother a gift, a painting done in oils showing 3 figures on a winter terrace, a man, a woman, and a child holding on to each other against the cold. "It's us," Margaret explained, her voice still quiet but stronger than it had been. "That first night, when everything changed." Clara stared at the painting through tears. "It's beautiful. You're beautiful, all of you. You took something broken and made it whole. We're still broken sometimes. I know, but you're broken together. That's what matters." That night, Clara hung the painting in the library, where it caught the firelight and threw shadows that looked like hope. Blackthorne stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his gray hair threaded with white now, but his eyes still sharp. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this? Choosing us?" Clara thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, frightened, convinced that love was a liability. Then she thought about who she'd become, a wife, a mother, a woman who'd learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but courage. "Not once," she said. "Not ever. Even when I'm impossible? Especially then." He kissed her temple, and they stood there watching their painting, frozen moment of the night that had changed everything. The night a white dress and a series of mistakes had transformed into something nobody could have predicted. A family, a home, a life worth living. Outside, spring was giving way to summer. In the gardens, their children played. In the village, people spoke of Lord and Lady Blackthorne with respect earned through action, not just status. And in the manor itself, warmth spread through every room, chasing away the cold that had lingered for so long. Clara Whitmore Blackthorne had learned many things in her complicated journey from paid companion to beloved wife and mother. But the most important lesson was this: courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was looking fear in the face and choosing to risk everything anyway. Because some things, some people, some loves, some families were worth the risk. Every single time. And as she stood in her library, surrounded by the life she'd built from ruins, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she'd choose it all again. The heartbreak, the terror, the impossible nights and uncertain mornings, all of it. For this, for them, for the stubborn, resilient hope that had grown from a single mistake into something unbreakable, for love.